Today we're looking into a pretty recent legal development. It involves two very public figures, DDG and Halle Bailey, and, well, a situation concerning their young son.
Yeah, and our source for this deep dive is essentially information from an article in The Independent. It's reporting on a specific court decision in their case.
Exactly. And our aim here is to get you up to speed quickly on what that source material actually says happened. So we're talking this specific claims made, how the court reportedly ruled, and also some, crucial background context in the article to help you really grasp the picture it paints.
Okay, right. Let's get into it. So the main event, the big news point from the Independent article, is this court ruling. YouTuber DDG, he requested a domestic violence restraining order against Halle Bailey. And the court said no. Not that request, the headline outcome, yeah, as reported. And according to the article, it was DDG. His legal name is Daryl Dwayne Granberry Jr., who actually started this specific legal action by seeking that order.
Okay, so why? What was the reason, according to the source, for him asking for this kind of order against Halle Bailey?
Well, he claimed she posed a, quote, risk to their son, Halo, who's about 17 months old. And the article, it gets pretty specific about his claims. It reports he alleged Bailey presented and this is another quote, imminent emotional and psychological risk to the minor child based on repeated, documented threats of self-harm.
Wow, okay, that's a really serious allegation.
Yeah.
Imminent risk, repeated, documented threats of self-harm. So what did he want the court to do exactly, based on those claims?
Specifically, he wanted to stop her from taking their son out of the United States. The article even notes he mentioned a specific trip, a planned vacation to Italy.
Okay, so the restraining order request was directly linked to stopping her international travel with their child. What was his stated reason for being concerned about Halo leaving the U.S.?
He claimed that once outside the United States, the toddler wouldn't have the specific protections of that court, and also something he called emergency intervention mechanisms.
Emergency intervention mechanisms. That sounds quite formal. Legal jargon. What does that likely mean here?
Yeah, it basically refers to the specific legal tools and, court procedures available within that particular jurisdiction. Ways the court could quickly step in if there's an immediate safety issue for the child. So his argument, as reported anyway, was that those tools just wouldn't be there if the child was overseas, which would leave him, in DDG's view, unprotected.
Got it. So DDG files claiming risk tied to these alleged self-harm threats, all aimed at blocking international travel because the child would supposedly lose legal protections. What about Halle Bailey's side? What does the source say about her response?
Well, according to the article, she didn't just sit back. She actively fought DDG's request. She filed her own documents asking the court flat out to deny his motion for that restraining order.
And did she ask the court for anything herself?
Yes, she did. She asked the court to give her explicit permission to take their son out of the country. And the article adds a key piece of context here. She stated the travel, the international trip, was necessary so she could work.
Oh, okay. So clarifying, it wasn't just like a holiday, but tied to her job, her career. Anything else she requested?
Yes. She also filed for another kind of order, this one asking DDG and also his family and friends to basically stop posting about their son, about the legal fight itself, and about her on any social media platforms.
Right. That specific request about social media, it really highlights just how public their lives are, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this actually ties into some really important background the source provides.
Absolutely. It's key context, This recent filing didn't just appear out of nowhere. The article points out that before this whole restraining order thing came up, Halle Bailey had actually been granted temporary physical and legal custody of Halo. That was back in May.
And why was that custody decision made earlier?
The source says that decision came after Bailey made allegations against DDG. Allegations that he had abused her, both physically and emotionally.
Wow. Okay, so there was already a pre-existing custody setup where Bailey had temporary custody, and that stemmed from these very serious abuse allegations she'd made against him. That definitely puts a different frame around who is making claims about risk now.
It certainly adds complexity, yeah.
Yeah.
Adds layers to understanding the dynamic reported here. And like you said, that request about stopping social media posts, it also links back to things that happened before. The article specifically brings up a public incident from last November.
Oh, right, the live stream incident. Remind us what happened there.
Yeah, the source details how Bailey went public on Twitter as it was then, mostly in a post she later deleted. She was clearly very upset because DDG had allowed Halo to appear in one of his live streams while she was out of town.
And how did she put it? How did she phrase her upset in that post? according to the article.
The article quotes her directly. She apparently wrote, "Hi everyone, just so you know, I am out of town and I don't approve of my baby being on a stream tonight." And she went on, "I wasn't told or notified and I am extremely upset to have my baby in front of millions of people." And then, emphasizing her perspective, "I am his mother and protector and saddened that I wasn't notified, especially when I am out of town."
Yeah, you can really hear the frustration there, feeling, cut out of a decision about her own child's public exposure, especially live. But the source also points out that this whole thing sparked pretty mixed reactions online, right?
It really did. It kind of highlighted that tension they seem to have about public versus private life. Some fans apparently thought she was being maybe a bit hypocritical. They pointed out that she also posts pictures of Halo on her own accounts, which get millions of views. The article quotes one comment like that, "in front of millions of people," and then has pictures of Halo on her account with millions of likes.
That's a point about consistency, I suppose, in this social media age.
Mm-hmm.
But others totally sided with her, didn't they? Focusing more on the feeling of being a mother whose parental decision was just ignored.
Exactly. The source mentions sympathetic fans who felt her reaction was completely understandable. One quote was something like, "As a mother, it's completely understandable that she would be upset, especially when her child's privacy is involved."
Okay.
So yeah, that incident really shows their different views on co-parenting and privacy sort of clashing out in the open.
Speaking of things being out in the open, the article also touches on when they first actually announced Halo's birth, after all that speculation.
Right, yeah, they announced his birth in January 2024. And the source quotes Halle Bailey's Instagram post from back then. She wrote, "Even though we're a few days into the new year, the greatest thing that 2023 could have done for me was bring me my son. Welcome to the world, my Halo. The world is desperate to know you." Which, again, just kind of sets the scene for how much public focus there is on this family.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. You've got this history, right? It includes prior abuse allegations from Bailey against DDG, which led to her getting temporary custody. Then you have these public clashes over parenting and privacy, like that live stream incident.
Mm-hmm.
And now, more recently, DDG files for this domestic violence restraining order. He's making these really serious claims about Bailey posing an imminent risk because of alleged self-harm threats.
Yeah.
And he's specifically trying to use that claim to stop her traveling abroad for work with their son.
That's the really complex picture the source material paints, yes. So the court, in this specific instance, had to look at DDG's claims, the imminent risk, the alleged threats of self-harm, based on whatever evidence was presented this time. And they had to weigh that against Bailey's request to travel for work and also consider the existing custody arrangement already in place.
Okay, and based on what the source reports, what was the court's final decision here?
Well, as reported by TMZ and then cited in the Independent article, the court ultimately sided with Bailey, which means essentially DDG's request for that domestic violence restraining order, it was denied.
Denied, okay. And crucially, the outcome of that denial means Halle Bailey is now allowed to travel internationally with Halo, just as she'd asked the court permission to do.
Right. And what that suggests, reading between the lines based on the source, is that the court looked at the evidence DDG presented for this specific request, the evidence supporting his claims of imminent risk and those self-harm threats, and basically found it wasn't enough to grant this particular type of order, the restraining order, or to impose that restriction on her travel right now. The legal bar for proving imminent risk is usually quite high. You generally need pretty clear, convincing evidence.
Sure.
So the court's ruling here seems to indicate that, in their assessment, DDG didn't meet that specific legal threshold for this kind of order and this specific request, despite how serious the claim sounded or, the background conflict reported.
So a clear outcome on this particular legal move. But it's set against this backdrop of intense public scrutiny, previous legal fights, and these really different ideas about parenting and privacy.
Precisely. The court ruled on the narrow legal question right in front of it, based on the evidence for that motion. But yeah, it's a public context and the history that make the whole situation so visible and, frankly, complicated.
Okay, so the main takeaway then from our deep dive into this Independent article. The court shut down DDG's attempt to get a restraining order against Halle Bailey. That request was based on claims of imminent risk linked to alleged self-harm threats, and it was aimed at stopping her from traveling with their son, Halo. The court said no to the order and yes to her travel.
Yeah, that sums up the core finding reported, and it leaves you with something to think about, maybe. In this era where everything feels public, especially for famous people, how does that constant, intense spotlight affect really private family issues, particularly when they become contentious legal battles involving kids? And, how do courts balance these very serious claims and complicated personal histories when they're making decisions about family life, decisions that are also inevitably playing out in the court of public opinion at the exact same time?